Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt. This is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 26th of June 2013. For newcomers, please make sure that you make good use of the website cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Lots of audios for download for free, and you can go through the history of the system you're living in to find out how it all happened if you're really interested. Most folk aren't because they think it's all real and they accept it the way it is. And but for those who want to find out what's been happening and how we came to this system of really, it's not just a technocracy, it's a scientific tyranny in a sense, because a different class of people emerged a long time ago, all paid for by their benefactors, those who ruled the world 100 years ago, because they were the world bankers at the time. And they got the academics underneath them to eventually bring up a system with thousands of think tanks, which they have under the guise of foundations that fund them all, and private foundations. And they would comprise a parallel government. And they did. And it's still here today. And with the private organizations like the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Council on Foreign Relations, and many others, all the big foundations, they run the world. They pay for all the thousands of non-governmental organizations out there that lobby government for law changes. And the government receives them very happily because it's all part of the game, you see. And it changed radically the whole existing law structure and the way that you live too, the societal structure as well. So help yourself to see how it all happened, the ones behind it, they're still at it yet, of course. And they give you a thing called democracy to make you to believe in, where you can vote every 4 or 5 years. And that's how they keep you from rebelling, basically. Quite simple. But they dreamed up a long time ago, big money, big men, and lots of foundations underneath their belt and all classified too as tax-free charitable foundations and philanthropic organizations. See, philanthropy technically is there to supposedly help the world through generosity. People who've made it in the world, like Bill Gates, who suddenly come up with the same agenda as all the other ones in the foundations. It just must happen to you when you hit a magic number of dollars and you see the light and you get downloaded with the same program. It's always the same program. Never a different one. It's always the same program of running the world by those who think that they should. So anyway, help yourself to the website. Remember too, you bring me to you. You can help me take along here by buying the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com, where I go through the art of this chronology and show you how it's been used for thousands of years and how reality is created for you all the time. Most folk don't live in reality at all. They're brought up in fiction and they get bits of reality and then they mix the two together and they can't really tell the difference anymore. And that's why it's so easy to manipulate them so easily. So anyway, you can buy the books in addition, remember, from the US to Canada using personal checks still, or you can use international postal money orders from the US to Canada from the post office. You can send cash or use PayPal across the world, Western Union, MoneyGram, and PayPal. Straight donations are seriously welcome because, everything, as you know, is going up in price. Everything, just to survive, basic survival, is just skyrocketing as all currencies are being devalued. And they call it quantitative easing. But of course, it's just devaluation of your currency, because that was the big plan even before they collapsed the banks. How do we bring in the public into austerity? It would be time to do it around 2008 or so. And probably planned about 50 years before that. And this is how they started off. The banks lost nothing. We bailed them all out. In fact, more than ever had before. And they're doing awfully, awfully well as they work under the Bank for International Settlements, again, a private organization that runs the World Bank and all the central banks of the world. And it was set up too by the CFR, Royal Institute of International Affairs, private organizations. None of the public have ever had a vote or a say in the big institutions that run our world, our lives, our very lives, in fact. And we think this is normal. That's quite something, isn't it? Back with more after this. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix, talking about the big system. What a system it is though, isn't it? It's everything. It's everything that you think you know. It's your opinions too, and you don't even know how you got to them. You think you've been really informed about every aspect of any particular topic, but you haven't, of course, especially through your schooling. And even out on the internet too, you've got to be awfully careful because there's so many different groups with different spins on the same stories. And you have to go behind all that to find out, well, who benefits at the end of it if this becomes law, that becomes law, or whatever it happens to be. And then you have other ones, this is an old dodge that the elites dreamed up a long time ago when they said, well, how are we going to keep our power if they bring in a form of democracy? Well, we'll give them democracy. At least they'll think they have democracy, and we'll give them all the left-wing organizations and the right-wing organizations to make them think that they'll actually run it. It's quite a good con. It really does work awfully simply well. All the time. And people never learn because they always get so sick of the bunch that are in, they vote them out. That's how it all works. And you think, well, anybody's better than the last bunch until they're in, of course, and the same agenda continues. Doesn't matter what wing they claim that they're on. It's the same bird, you see. Same body. And the agenda goes on. And it's interesting, too, that when you look at the writings of the U.S. founding fathers, and Jefferson said it, too, when you see a continuation of a policy and agenda between changes of the House, meaning the representatives, and it's the same agenda going through. You know that you're under tyranny. You're taken over. It's taken over. No then. They all knew this stuff because they had better education back in those days. They didn't have GM food, didn't watch television to get brainwashed. And of course the education that they had was a really, strict basic education and language, reason, logic, and so on, which is absent today. In fact, there's more fantasy encouraged today than logic. And folk love it. It's addictive, you see. Understand everything that's a normal trait, a natural trait in humanity is used by those who know how to use it against you. And mankind's always wanted a bit of escapism because life was never that great. It's like Charles Galton Darwin says, there's always been slavery in one form or another. He says, and we are in the process of creating a new, more perfected form of slavery. This is what we're in today. It's a perfected form. And so in ancient times, they'd like to get away from their slavery and so on, and they'd give them little plays and little storytellers. A really good storyteller could travel the ancient world telling stories and earn a good living back in those days. The Greeks especially, even in the Roman Empire, the Greeks were brought into their courts and so on. They'd give good, nice stories and spin their fantasy. And the folk loved it because we need that little bit of escapism. But when you cannot stop it actually, put the border down and say, well, that's enough escapism for today, I better get on with reality, you're in trouble. People can't today because the fiction actually merges with the reality. And then you get all the other different groups out there that are funded by the big boys that have thought of all these things, who will give you people, frontmen basically, will come out and tell you all weird kind of things about what's happening in the world today. It's led by, walking alligators that drink blood and they wear crowns on their head. Stuff like that. And they mix it with all the natural stuff, which is the basic facts of what's happening, so that when you talk about the basic facts, you're lumped in with the guys that think that, that royalty's sucking the blood of folk after turning into reptiles. I mean, this is how crazy it gets. Crazy. See, that's counterintelligence. That's what that's called, folks. You counter intelligence. Intelligence is the basic facts. But then you ridicule it. And then, of course, when you come up with the basic fact, you ridiculed along with the rest of them, or it's Bigfoot or something else. And they've done many polls, and they published one a few months ago in the mainstream to show you that so many folk are falling for all this stuff. And they've got everything mixed up, 9/11, you name it, with the Queen Mother drinking, the blood of children and stuff after she turns into a reptile. And she's all kind of scaly and stuff. I thought it was just the measles myself. But anyway, that's what you get in this. They thought of everything at the top. And then you get the right-wing groups pushing for right-wing things, which are all controlled, and the left-wing groups too. And they all have little good tidbits of information about things. But you've got to understand what they have in mind as well. Remember, all the left-wing groups, especially the ones that are funded by governments, and they also have non-governmental organization status. Now, to get non-organizational status or charitable status in Canada and all the countries under the United Nations, because they sign a treaty on all this, you must promise that your group is for radical change. Now, what is radical change? Radical change was a Communist manifesto. Still is, you see. Destruction of the family unit and all the rest of it, all the way down. And that's what it's about. They call it fairness for everything. Well, how can it be fair when other folk are getting destroyed by it? It's not fair at all, is it? But anyway, this Global Research, for instance, they put some good stuff out, but it tells you on it, World Socialist website. For those who want to understand what world socialism is, look at Tony Blair. You think he's a socialist? Some folk think he's even a Roman Catholic. That guy can turn into anything he wants to be. So can his wife. Look at her history. It goes all the way back to the John Wilkes Booth. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Just international revolutionaries, they're always continuing on in the same, mind you, the awfully rich doing it too. It's not done out of charity, believe you me. Anyway, it says here in this article, police state Canada, Harper, government enacts law threatening mass protesters with 10-year jail terms. So legislation that gives a Canadian state draconian and arbitrary powers to suppress protests became law last week after approval from the Conservative Party-dominated federal parliament. And it says Bill C-309. It's called the Preventing Persons from Concealing Their Identities During Riots and Unlawful Assemblies Act. Makes it a crime punishable by a 10-year prison term to incite a riot while wearing a mask or any face covering, including face paint. Now in Canada, we're very liberal here. And they've had little, almost riots here with people who dress up as the opposite gender, wearing wigs and face paint and everything. Will that include that? Will it include them? Will it? Come on here. I'm being serious. Or why don't the rioters in the future all dress up like that? And then they can sue the government if they arrest them. You understand? You got to start thinking here too. Because it all becomes farcical. Oh, it does. Anyway, someone who merely participates in a riot or in an unlawful assembly with their face covered can, under the law, be deemed to have committed an indictable criminal offence and jailed for up to 5 years. These new offences are in addition to the existing criminal code offences of participating in a riot and participating in an unlawful assembly. Unlawful, that means you haven't got a license to demonstrate. Persons convicted of the former can be jailed for a maximum of 2 years, while the latter is considered to be amongst the lower tier of criminal offences known as summary offences, which carry a maximum 6-month jail term. Under Canadian law, police and other authorities have very broad powers to illegalise protests by declaring them unlawful assemblies. The criminal code describes an unlawful assembly as a gathering that causes people to fear on reasonable grounds that it will disturb the peace tumultuously or provoke others to do so. During last year's 6-month-long Quebec student strike, police declared numerous protests unlawful assemblies, then violently set about dispersing the crowd with tear gas, baton charges and mass arrests. In response to the tear gas, many demonstrators covered their faces with handkerchiefs. Had the new law been in force, they could potentially have been charged with concealing their identities and targeted for punitive jail terms up to 5 years. And critics of the new law have rightly condemned it as a flagrant attack on the right to free speech. Well, how can you talk in free speech if you're being gassed? It takes you to breathe, whether you're wearing a handkerchief or not. Really, you'd have to wear the same stuff that the cops are wearing, obviously, not to asphyxiate yourself. Masks and face paint have been used for centuries to make political points, and there are many reasons, including fear of victimization by employers, that can cause protesters to choose to conceal their faces. Police, it need be added, have subjected political protests to blanket surveillance for years, actually it's forever, systematically photographing and videotaping demonstrations. All British Commonwealth countries have done that since even before the 60s. Mass surveilling and photographing of everybody in the demonstrations. And they do find out, even back then, they found out who every single person was. Because you've never had democracy. You've really been under a spy government. It says, moreover, there's a long history of police instigating violence at demonstrations through provocative crowd control tactics and the use of agent provocateurs. So they found a bunch in Quebec in a previous time at one of the big world meetings that was there for globalism. And they all had these same military boots on too when they caught these guys. But yeah, they were sent in to start the smashing the window stuff and all the rest of it, which of course, against like counterintelligence, it falls off in the ones who are just there to simply demonstrate peaceably. Just as I say, counterintelligence means you counter the intelligence, and that's why you put out the fake ones out there that pretend they're you, and they speak all the right things, but then they mix it with stuff from outer space. And it says, Bill C-309 began as a private member's bill. Only really do such bills become law, but the Conservative government chose to make it a legislative priority. Wouldn't matter, because whatever government comes next, it probably won't be Conservative, will carry on. Because there's only one agenda. The same people own the country, and it's owned. Canada's owned. Every country is owned by the same people. And they keep, as I said, changing the House, as I say, or the Congress, or the Legislature Assembly. And same idea. The politicians, and the same agenda goes forward. Look through all the United Nations agreements, one after another, different changes in the government, and it's the same agenda. Sign. All, never say no. That's it. Also tonight, too, I put up a link to Richard Dawkins. I call it Waiting for Dogod. And attempts to, is meme-dom, it says, via Saatchi and Saatchi. In other words, he wants to get up there into Starcase. And I don't know if you know that the guys that the Unabomber talks about, because he was a member, a university professor, and he mixed with some of the guys that were in the role of creating idol worship or stardom for scientists. Do you understand they do that too? So that you'll listen to these guys as being somehow more superior to you, and whatever their opinions are, you'll take them to heart and follow it. He worked with the guys. I put the links up before where you hear these actual guys talking about how they do it. They still do it yet. One of them's still in the business of creating stars, using the same machinery for rock stars. And you see a person who then has that kind of credence in your eyes, and promoted by the media. Whatever you say about any topic at all, you'll say, well, he must be smarter than we are, so I guess he's right. That's how they did it with Einstein too. All he did was talk about globalism. Not the stuff he supposedly discovered. Back with more after this. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix, talking about reality and so on, and how obviously there's nothing missed. Remember, I always get back to Bernays, Edward Bernays, who really created the American Consumer Society and many other things beyond. He worked with many governments down in the different presidents, including how to get wars set up and all the rest of it, and how to con the public and use propaganda to its maximum effect. And even got war started himself to save his own accounts with certain big producers of food in Latin America. He used the US military to go down and kick out the democratic elected government, call them communists, but they weren't. But this is how things really happen in the world. But getting back now to how they create stars out of things. You can pick up anybody and create a star. Straight and Crooked Thinking is a good book to start with. To show you can pick a guy on a soapbox in Hyde Park in London. Who's a tramp, basically, a vagrant. And there's lots of them that would do that. And they get there and they'd rant away. And some of their talks are quite nice, actually. And folk would jeer them, etc., because they're a tramp and have a good laugh. But you dress the guy up with a tux and a whole bit and promote him through the media as being some genius, etc., and give him a fake background, put him up there, and thousands and thousands will pay big money to come into some big theatre to listen to the guy talk. And then they'll all have great write-ups about him. That's how simple it is to con the general public. It's all perception management. And of course, I've mentioned to do with this article, Richard Dawkins. I mean, Dawkins has got his agenda. It's not his agenda, by the way. He's just a little worker of it. It's a big agenda. And it's important that he gets it through for the big boys so that you're even easier to manage. And you can break old concepts that were concepts of survival. They must be destroyed. Once you're all dysfunctional, then government has more and more control handling all the fallout. And that's why you have all these agencies in government now. And alcoholism and drug addiction. And children getting whacked off their parents, just taken away. And all the rest of it. And permanent unemployed classes that they're actually classes unemployable because of the addictions and various things. That's how you control society. You dominate it. Hard to dominate a society where every little family is either self-sufficient, or at least self-sufficiency in their thinking processes with their brains functioning. So you're given your stars, and getting back to creating stars, and if you go into, I'll put it up again tonight, if I can find it in my archive section at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. It was about the Unabomber, and it was a documentary, excellent documentary about stuff you didn't know, and it's called The Net. And it goes through how even they set up the Grateful Dead band. They put them out there with these scientists, by the way. They're all scientists to do with psychology, the mind, and so on. And they traveled with them, and they threw out bags of LSD and different drugs because it was legal initially, and to get the people started, to get it all started, and really studied them. And they came out too with scientists who were getting big money, government funding, and funding also from foundations to start the whole psychedelic era. And they even put the big money into creating the strobe lighting and stuff for dance halls so they can really trip out on their drugs and really go to town. All that stuff was created by, not by people at the bottom, street level. That was all created by people at the top, CIA, MI6, Mossad, and all the rest of it. But they create the stars, you see. And they go through the process because, I say, one of the guys in this Arctic, this net, they call it the net, he actually still is in the business of creating stars from people that you're supposed to listen to and give your mind over to. And I'll take his opinion. He's a clever guy. So simple, eh? Anyway, back to Richard Dawkins is another one. And it says here, it says the term, though, because you know that the whole thing is, he came out with his 1976 book on evolution, Mr. Dawkins. This is The Selfish Gene, it was called. And it says originally the term referred to ideas or behaviors that propagate within a culture, analogous with how genes spread within a gene pool. Now everybody lauds it, and it's still lauded today. But you can take that concept and say, well, if you're just a product to your genes and what you do, including your criminal activity, how about the bankers? You could go to town on that one, couldn't you? And you get always a protest. But it's okay if he says it, you see, because he's pointing you to think to other people. The term, though, has been hijacked in recent years, settling into a new life referring to internet memes, cultural, and he got the meme too. The meme is the me generation. That's where it came from. And it says cultural touchstones that spread rapidly across the web. Now a video created for Saatchi and Cannes, Dawkins has attempted to become a meme himself, or at least has an attempt at memedom thrust upon him. Described as a showcase theatrical piece, the 9-minute video begins with a short lecture by Dawkins on natural selection. He says the world is divided into things that look designed like birds and airliners and things that don't, rocks and mountains. Things that look designed are further divided into those that are really designed, such as submarines and tin openers, and those that aren't designed but look that way because they result from Darwinian natural selection, such as sharks and hedgehogs. He continues to outline the concept of memes, describing them as anything that spreads by imitation. Now, there's another concept to this, understand, because you can make anything not just a fad. It's a bit beyond that. It's a must-be. A must-be is something like the CFR has, comes from Foreign Relations, Relationship of International Affairs, the World Bank, things that they all own. And they own the United Nations who set it up, by the way. And something that must be is down to a timetable. This must be implemented by so-and-so. This must be implemented by so-and-so. They did it with abortion issues and the so-called free love scene that they brought out in the 60s. They had tried before when they were still called different groups in the late 1800s. H.G. Wells first wrote and promoted so-called free love in the late 1800s. But they didn't have the abortion clinics on the go. There was a lot of fallout. A lot of children were born and ended up in terrible Dickensian type foster homes or else in homes where they're being massively abused and so on. So they brought it back in the 20s and 30s, but because then they brought in prohibition for the booze industry to make sure that a few people could then own the new booze system, which they did. The Bronfmans made their money off it. And they made it sexy to be in a booze can. It's illegal. Anything you make illegal, the youngsters will flock to it. And they did, and they found out all these alcoholics afterwards. But once again, and they brought the miniskirt in too in the 20s and 30s. But again, they got lots of venereal disease with no penicillin, and they had backstreet abortionists. So they brought it back in the 60s once they created the pill. Back with more after this.
You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network. Because you can handle the truth.
Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix, talking about Dawkins. I think everybody knows about Dawkins because again, he's been elevated to star status from nothing really. But getting back to sort of the Unabomber and that documentary I put up tonight too, called The Net. Excellent movie. I hope it's been taken off or it's been censored or whatever, bits taken out of it. Because they go through John Brockman. Brockman was the guy who was assigned long ago and he still works at it, of creating stars that people will listen to. If you have a group or anything that's a threat to government, you can be a star out of the person you put up as the person who's going to lead the opposition, the ones that's going to, so you put them in. That's how you do it. That's how even the CIA does, things like that, you see. And of course they're all connected because they all work together, if not even the same thing, actually. I think it's the same thing, personally. There's a lot of evidence there. But that's how they do it. I mean, don't wait for a hero to arise for the people, and supply them instead. And keep them going round in circles forever. Also put up tonight, all these links I'll put up tonight, remember, at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Now, the US Supreme Court in historic rulings on same-gender marriage, it says. This is BBC. And they go on about it too as a big, big victory for something. And it says that the Supreme Court has struck down a law denying federal benefits to gay couples and cleared the way for same-sex marriage in California, and so on and so on. And they go through that, etc., etc., etc. Now, I'll put that up. But another one, too, is to do with the mind. The mind's awfully important. I mean, look at the Brain Project I've mentioned many times. Obama's kicked off with millions and millions of dollars to literally map the whole mind. Not just the mind, but what the person thinks. Well, this bit's flashing in the neurons and this part of the brain and that part of the brain, what's connected and so on. You understand it, and they also gave big grants to the European Union, and they put money in too, because they're all in it together. Japan's involved, all the countries are involved, because we're all global, you see. And they all get their cash from the same sources, on the same agendas. There's no such thing as antagonists in this world, except the ones that don't belong to the World Bank and have privatized central banks, like the countries in the Middle East have been bombing for years. So everybody's going to be standardized. So it says here, tag team threat recognition technology incorporates mind and machine. Now, DARPA, which is the US defense bunch at the top, the ones who always put the ones that links about, we helped a paraplegic by putting a brain chip in them, and now we can email just by thinking to someone. Once in a while, it works, you see. And you thought, well, that's wonderful. The guys who make up all this warfare machinery that slaughters folks remotely and stuff, they're really there to help us all, you know. What a weird melds we have in our brains, eh? By the indoctrination process. But anyway, it says, for war fighters operating in the field, the ability to detect threats from standoff distances can be life-saving. When advanced radar and drone coverage is not available, war fighters typically rely on their own vision to scan their surroundings. Scanning over a wide area, though, is challenging, etc., etc. Current technology like binoculars, cameras, portable radars can help improve visibility, but it's not everything. It says DARPA's launched a cognitive technology threat warning system as they move the soldiers further into the cyborg, which is always, they publish many articles in Jane's magazine and all the other ones for over years on this stuff. And it says, this program came out in 2008 with the goal of maximizing warfighters' awareness of their surroundings by developing man-portable visual threat detection devices. And they go through some of them that gives you a far better field of view and so on. And then it says DARPA set out to solve a common challenge for forward troops. How can you reliably detect potential threats and target some interest without making it a resource drain? I like how they call it a resource drain, eh? The prototype system has demonstrated an extremely low false alarm, a detection rate in the low 90s, all while reducing the load on the operator. In other words, they've got a whole system there that tells them when to kill people. And it throws me back to an old movie that came out, again, predictive programming. That's how your things are normal and progressing normally by all the fiction that you watch, because that's where they put it all. And it was, I think it was called Blue Thunder, about an advanced helicopter to go over cities. They could see through the walls like they can today. It was back in the 70s. And they could kill off folk in a crowd almost selectively with a false kill rate. In other words, people who were just bystanders, about 10%, which was acceptable. Well, this article is about the same kind of thing. And so they're reducing the slaughter that they do on bystanders and each other, by the way. They kill all of each other in these wars. And this is to help them. So that's what DARPA is really up about too. It's maximizing the proper kill rates and minimizing wasting bullets on the peasants. I mean, the peasants are 10 a dozen, aren't they? We know that by now. And then you see this article too. It says, prosthetic limbs controlled by thought during development. See, once again, this is, understand from the last article I read, that's what they're really into. They want to chip the soldiers. And some of them are chipped anyway. I've no doubt on that at all. They were trying chips out back in the 70s on troops in Britain, selective troops in Britain. And in the States as well. Prosthetic limbs controlled by thought are in development. It says, So DARPA again. Consider how easily you go about daily tasks, grabbing things and so on. But imagine what would happen if you lost a limb, etc. The Defense Department Agency has been at work since 2009 developing prosthetic limbs that can actually be controlled by the wearer's brain. Well, actually that ties in with the previous articles, if you go into Jane's and other ones, to do with the cyborg. When they can have a hand attached to you that can crush the opponent's throat without bleeding, it would just go crunch, just like a tin can. Saves a lot of time killing people that way, doesn't it? It saves all that leg kicking and all that stuff, you see in the movies. Efficiency is what they're all about, you see. Because that's your future, folks. And I said years ago, the big mass killing machine that you've got all over the planet will come back to home, to you. Still killing. And big boys know it too. But don't wear masks as you protest. 10 extraordinary Pentagon mind experiments as well. Good one. And it says, it goes through the author and so on, and it goes through the Robo-Roach, it's called, Wake Up Sleepy, DARPA's 24/7 soldier program from a decade ago, sought to identify and strengthen parts of a soldier's brain resistant to sleep deprivation. Another one's called Monkey See. They funded Professor Miguel Nicolas of Duke University, demonstrate that a monkey with implants can be taught to move a joystick just by thinking. There's a lot of them do that just by watching porn on the net. And they're monkeys too. Brain to brain, the same researcher who trained a monkey to move a joystick with his mind recently connected and passed signals between two living rats' brains. I mean, why? They should give those guys some kind of Nobel something, eh? And then it was Gogglebox, the cognitive technology threat warning system project aims to build brain goggles that tap the subconscious to detect threats before the wearer's conscious mind. That's not hard to do these days, is it? First impressions, the future attribute screening technology uses sensors to detect tiny changes in heart rate, gaze, and pupil dilation to screen people at airports. These are all past things. These are the ones I've admitted to. Force field, military brain science is not all mind control. The DARPA blast gauge measures exposure to explosion and helps identify soldiers who may have hidden injuries. And the Brain Boost, DARPA initiated a program to help intelligence analysts identify interesting satellite images as filters are trained using brain patterns of skilled personnel. Story writers, a recent DARPA program seeks to use cutting-edge neuroscience to develop narratives that would influence the thinking of a foreign audience. Now, they've been doing that for years. And they used to call it psycholinguistics. Now they call it neurolinguistics, because you come to the conclusions by a pattern of words, called a sentence or a paragraph, and you come to the conclusion at the end of it, because that's what you're fed in that sequence. It's all to do with the sequencing of it. Works all the time on most folk, you see. And I'll put this article up tonight too. It says, scientists have connected the brains of lab rats, allowing one to communicate directly to another through an electronic link. Well, that's not for rats, folks. I mean, we don't have that kind of problem with rats. Rats are very intelligent. They've been surviving apparently for millions of years, according to Dawkins. And it says it's been 30 years since the first message was sent over initial nodes of the ARPANET, it was called, the Pentagon-sponsored precursor to the Internet. But this month, researchers announced something that could easily be equally historic, the passing of messages between two rat brains. I wonder how much that cost you all, eh? And it goes through the whole story. I'll put up tonight too for those who have the patience to trek through it. Also, new technology allows a person to interact with computers and robotics using just the mind. And it says by placing a small electrode on or inside the brain, scientists have developed a method whereby patients are able to interact with computers or control robotic limbs simply by thinking about how to execute those actions. That's from the University of California. And it says by placing the electrodes in them, they can actually make them move and so on. Designed to improve daily life for those who suffer from paralysis or have lost the ability to speak from a stroke or neurodegenerative disease, because we know that DARPA is really interested in helping people, right? University of Washington researchers, it's all grant money from the big boys and governments for the big war industry. That's what universities are for. They've recently demonstrated that when humans are using the technology, the brain behaves much like it does when completing simple motor tasks such as kicking a ball or waving. For this reason, they hypothesize that learning to control a robotic arm or prosthetic limb could become second nature for those using it. In other words, it's back to cybernetics. And that's what it's really for. It's all for that, folks. They don't give a damn about folk losing their limbs. And As I say too, I'll also put in more to do with the overview of past and future brain research projects. The EU budget has provided more than 1.9 billion euro for brain research. Again, part of this big project that Obama is also doing. Since the start of the current EU Framework Programme for Research, FP7 in 2007. This has funded more than 1,200 projects with more than 1,500 participants from the EU and beyond. Looking back on the European Month of the Brain in May, they give you a retrospective look at the range of brain-related research projects the EU is funding in the field of information and communications technologies. It's quite a good article too. Now remember that you are the target of all this. Understand, the elite already have their scientific tyranny, as we see that Huxley talked about. And Huxley said too at Berkeley in 1967, I think it was, but he said in his talk there, and I might put a link up tonight too again too, he actually went through that he didn't see why a scientific dictatorship, which the people would be oblivious of, we're all trained to listen to experts, and you don't even ask how that happened, or why you obey them, or parrot what they say. It was all dreamed up a long time ago. And Aldous Huxley talked about it at Berkeley, and he says, I don't see why a scientific dictatorship could not last forever, because the public would be unable to understand what was going on. Beyond their ken of the past, or any experience they could relate to go against it. They'd think it was all quite normal. They do already. But it says here, information technologies have long had an association with the human brain. The old simple explanation of a computer was like a sort of electronic brain, but computers have rapidly become so ubiquitous that nowadays the beginner's explanation of the brain is often that it's like a kind of biological computer. Common in the year's announcement of the 150 million euro launching of the funding for the brain-related ICT research projects, Neelie Kroes, Vice President of the European Commission responsible for the digital agenda for Europe, said, despite great progress over recent decades, there's much more still to be discovered from computers that think like our brains do, like computers networks that replicate brain structure to better cope with big data, to detecting and curing the brain disorders that affect up to 1/3 of Europeans each year, from Alzheimer's and autism to schizophrenia. And it's just, mind you, we're getting those with aluminum oxide, of course, and that's in the spray, the Geo-engineering we've had since 98 solid. And you'll find that in every Alzheimer's brain, by the way. And they've known that since the 70s. Understanding the human brain is therefore one of the greatest challenges facing 21st century science. Now, why is that, really? Understand control factor, folks. It's all about total control over the masses. Complete control over the masses. You understand, tyrannies have to have everyone being predictable. Anyone who's not predictable could be a threat. Anyone could be a threat. And that's how the elite decided a long time ago the world wasn't going to carry all of you forever. It was not going to do it. And therefore they went into all these talks, just like sci-fi movies much, much later on. Okay, we'll have to save ourselves. Now who should we save? H.G. Wells had a list of the peoples that would be saved. Because he worked for these big foundations back in his day. He was a propagandist for them. And just like they've had, it's like something coming your way to destroy the world. What do? Well, you pick the best brains, and so the folk that are really necessary, all the experts. And they should breed, so you bring their wives along too, because hopefully they've mated properly too, you see, in their peer group. And then it goes down the ladder, down to the bottom of all of you, and if there's no room for you, you get a lotto. I actually had that one in the movie Deep Impact. Well, they had these discussions back 100 odd years ago. The richest folk on the planet had them in big meetings. And they came up, what kind of future are we going to create to manage the public who might get ticked off with what we're doing and what we plan? Well, you're in it, folks. You can't get slapped around enough. You watch the same bankers plunder you at least 2-3 times a century, and many little ones in between. You've watched your government set up to rob your bank accounts on behalf of the bankers. They're not going to change the banker system, so they're not going to jail them either. Because you see, they're at the top of the tree. I'm not talking about banks that you go and visit for your pennies. I'm talking about the guys who are international money lenders, the guys who work for the World Bank, the guys who tell the World Bank what to do. Because the whole money system is a giant scam to start with, but those who control it are at the top of the tree. Everybody else is down below, in descending order. And they decided a long time ago, and still do it today, how to manage all of you is to take you down. How can they say from the Department of Defense, in that 90-page report that came out, the big think tank brought out for them, on the future, and it says that we're going to put all the people into the big cities, and diseases will break out. And by the year 2040, 2050, a good mass of them will all be dead. How could you come up with it? That's quite the crystal ball, isn't it? And then you have Agenda 21. You have the massive geo-engineering that's been going on. It's flooding some countries like Canada. Speaking of, by the way, just coincidence, of course, because it all falls together, and we have all these coincidences. We have, just before Alberta got flooded out, and I got monsoons here in Ontario. I had no spring at all. And this last couple of days is the first couple of sun I've seen since one of the days in winter, I think, when it didn't snow. This is all geo-engineering. I watch them. I've been watching them for years, spraying above me. Get up early in the morning and look up once in a while. Watch the stuff coming down. Watch the weather patterns immediately change. But just to come out, as I say, in time for all the flooding in Canada comes this report from a university in Canada. I was given a task from the University of Waterloo, and it says here that it's called Climate Change Adaptation Project that fits right in with Agenda 21 and sustainability and the Millennial Project from the United Nations. Millennium Project is called. Adaptation Project. So we've all to adapt as they flood us and make us think that we are the problem. And folk will believe it. Most of them already probably do that watch regular television and nothing else. What else could it be? Isn't it beautiful? And they'll get folk off the land this way. They'll flood them out. Never mind the amount of deer fly. You've got horse fly. You've got mosquitoes like you've never seen them before with all this wetness. Remember the Malthusian Project in his book? Where would you put the people? Put them in unhealthy places to live. Well, today, you see, with science, we can make them unhealthy places to live. Insufferable, in fact. And you drive them out. No point staying on the land either if you can't grow anything. It's being flooded out. You've got snow to the end of May. You're putting fires on in June. And it's all your fault with breathing CO2. And you've got to pay massive taxes to these same big, what would you call them? What would you call them? The Wizards of Oz, behind the curtain. That present one reality which you accept as they pull the little levers and laugh and laugh and laugh at you. Oh, quite something. So I'll put this link up tonight too. Climate Change for Canadians Adaptation Project. It just came out just in time for the flooding of Alberta and other parts of Canada too. I can remember when they did it back in 2005, and they flooded out the grain growing areas and the food growing areas. Did the same in the States at the same time as well. Just precision targeting. Easy to do. This is old stuff, weather warfare. Old stuff. Old stuff. So I'll put this up tonight too, on the brain projects and everything else. And that PDF on, again, how we've all got to adapt and pay through the nose for existing to the same people who are killing us and laughing at us. Also, is the government spying on you through your own computer's webcam or microphone? Well, that's old stuff, but I'll put it up. And anyone who doesn't know that, even folk who don't search out the news, I mean, all this stuff comes from the regular news. They've been telling us for years, yeah, we can switch on your webcam or microphone, and we've been doing it since the 90s, you know. But I'll put up tonight too. And also put up to, it's a good article, the legally criminal haven of offshores. That's the offshore tax havens we're talking about. It's from English Pravda. But they call it legally criminal. Now, define criminal. If it's legal, you see it's legal. You would say immoral. But those who you would claim are immoral would talk amongst themselves, since they're high up there at the top of the tree. They're survivors. They're called realists, you see. And the schmucks down below are the stats, nothing else. Because they all live in fear and have no power, you see. The ones near the top, they got lots of power. So they make it legal. But there's a lot is being said about the collapse of international offshore business. This is the real grounds for such discussions, but many people don't have an idea what offshore is. I generally believe that there's a secret organization somewhere that secretly rules the world. However, what is the point of such an organization to exist if it's not people, but money that rules the world? According the world is ruled from the place where there's lots of money. The sources of financial well-being are very hard to count, and no organization can collect them into one. Is there such a place in the world, etc., etc.? And they go into some of the histories, going back into the 19th century of tax havens and somehow countries set up these tax havens, etc., etc., etc. Also tonight too, I mentioned the good video, not the porno one, by the way. Apparently there's one called that, and it's to do with star suckers. Make sure you get the right one. It's the one to do with going into how you're manipulated through perception management. But also the second half, don't forget to watch it. It goes through the big boys that give you, from the music industry, and how they're into charity and to help you. And they rake in billions of dollars, and none of it gets to where it's supposed to go. But it's a big fanfare, and all the stars that you just love, you've been taught to love them, are up there, getting all the cash rolling in. And of course, I've mentioned Bono, for instance, many times, as he's a front man for the big boys at the top for the banks. See, the scam is that your countries will sign on to give money to another country. We're going to give these poor folk money. But our country's broke, so we'll borrow it from the World Bank. And we'll put the Canadians or the Americans down as the guarantors to pay it off if this third country defaults, the third country defaults. And they do it every time. Once they default, there's no problem. Because your country then have got you down already for the guarantors, and then you immediately are told, give them another loan, which you do. This has been going on my whole life. And there's all these front guys like Bono, And here he is in the paper. Bono insists moving the U2, the group that he was in, that was made up for them, of course, like they all are, for lower taxes was just business. So he moved offshore for his taxes. So he got a lower taxing. And it says, he wonders why the band can't be seen to be tough as he talks to Gay Byrne. It says that the singer opened his heart to Gay Byrne last night in the Meaning of Life show, and insisted being good businessmen doesn't make you two bad people. You see? He says the shock horror moment here is you two behaving like a business. Oh dear. We live in a small rock in the North Atlantic, and we should be underwater were it not for very clever people working in government and in the revenue system who made tax competitiveness a central part of Irish economic life. He says that without the F word anywhere. It's amazing. Maybe they censored it out. I didn't know he could speak like this. I'm really impressed. It says it's the reason why we have companies like Google, Facebook, and indeed I helped bring those companies to Ireland. Oh, there's a little disclosure, eh? So it's more than churlish for Irish people to say, well, we don't want an Irish company involved in that stuff, and we do want everyone else. So in other words, he's allowed to go offshore and get less tax for him. And then in Article 2, Bono's one foundation, big foundation, he gets all the cash, is under fire for giving, you know how much they give to the charity? 1%. Oh, the guy's he's a hero. He's a hero to the children. And then, again, I said, I helped bring Facebook and Google here, so why can't I be tough in business? That's the front men they give you, folks. Big banking boys front men. And you fall for it. Well, from Hamish myself from Ontario, Canada, it's good night to me. Your God or your gods go with you.